Recently I saw Alpharad's video where he ranked every character that he's ever played in a fighting game. I thought, I play a lot of games, but I don't play fighting games, I play card games. So I thought I'd pull the classic yoink and twist and rank every deck that I've ever considered my main deck of the format. Let's dive in. Since most of my videos on this channel are about Pokemon, I decided to cover the Pokemon decks first. I've been playing the Pokemon card game for most of my life, but I didn't play competitively up until 2018. The first event that I went to was the Lost Thunder pre-release, and during Lost Thunder, Blacephalon GX was that boy, which is why I made this deck. I didn't know a ton about the game competitively yet, so I just kind of picked the deck that was good at the time, and little did I know it would shape my competitive playstyle for years to come. I love decks that have no cap on how much damage they could do, and that's exactly what Blacephalon GX specializes in. He has an attack that lets you discard energy from anywhere on the board to do 50 damage for each one, so if you drew the right hand and you saw the right cards, you could one-shot anything, including the 3 prizers, the massive tag teams at the time. Blacephalon GX is an absolute S tier for me. It was the first deck that I made in this game, and I was winning immediately. I was having a ton of fun doing it. We're gonna call S tier, I love this game. These are decks that make me love the game. They're so fun. They win. S tier. The second deck that I built was Gardevoir and Sylveon GX. Like I said, everyone was playing tag teams around then, so I wanted to try a tag team deck of my own, and this is the one I picked. It does 150 and moves around your energy when you attack, so it two-shots pretty much everything in the game while it gets two-shotted. But because it's a fairy deck, you could play cards that let you heal. You could play Fairy Charms, which made you not take damage at all from certain types. The ability to wall out your opponent with Fairy Charms was pretty funny, but the deck didn't really click with me playstyle wise as much, and it wasn't as good as the other deck I had, Blacephalon, so we're going to give it a C tier. These are decks that are kind of funny. The next deck on the list is Zoroark GX. If you know me, if you've seen my channel, my profile picture, or the shelf above my PC, you would know that Zoroark is my favorite Pokemon of all time. There's a story behind that, but part of it is because of this card right here. It has an ability called Trade that lets you discard a card to draw 2. We have cards that do that nowadays that don't see a ton of play, but the difference is Zoroark is also your main attacker, so he doesn't clog your bench by just being a draw engine, which meant that you could easily put up 4 of him without a penalty, and you see 8 new cards every turn. It was the most consistent way in the game to draw cards. You could play a bunch of weird techie one-of supporters and items that just like won certain matchups. I know it's not exactly my playstyle, but I absolutely loved the versatility of this deck. You could also play it with different attackers, like different secondary attackers. I remember playing with Lycanroc. I played it with this weird Naganadel once that just like shuffled everybody's prizes back and put in 3 new ones. This was an awesome deck, and it is an absolute S tier for me. This deck made me love this game. The next deck on the list was Baby Blacephalon. We called it Baby Blacephalon because it had a GX counterpart and it was the smaller one, so yeah. It has a similar attack where it doesn't have a cap to the damage that it can do, but instead of detaching from the board, you discard it from hand. It took 3 energy to set up instead of 2, so it was definitely slower than the GX version, but it gave you a little time to miss a turn or 2 because it was a 1-prizer deck, so it took the opponent more turns to win the game. This deck was super fun. I didn't play it to as much success as I did Blacephalon GX, but I am going to give it a fat A tier for I'm having fun. These are decks that I had a ton of fun with, but they weren't exactly as good as the S tier decks. I know there's a big jump to the next deck here time frame wise, and that's because we got hit with the dark ages of COVID. You couldn't really play card games competitively during COVID, especially with Pokemon being like a kid-oriented game. Places were really afraid to host Pokemon, so I don't think we got back to locals until like 2022, like 2 years later. And when we did, I decided to make Arceus V-Star. He has an attack that lets you ramp any type of basic energies to your guys on the field, so you could play a bunch of different types of Pokemon and just like weakness toolbox one-shot everything, which is what I did. At first, I played it with Moltres and Zapdos, the Galarian birds, to just hit the right weaknesses in the format. And then later on, it had a bunch of different variants. I played it with Duraludon just because he was huge, and like Inteleon. It was a cool deck. It wasn't really my play style. It wasn't really that fun for me, honestly, but it was good. I'm gonna give it B tier for 9 to 5. These are decks you clock in with. You're gonna win. You're gonna win some games, but you might not have the time of your life playing them. Lugia V-Star. When I was playing Arceus, I remember when Lugia got leaked and everybody said it was going to be like the next tier 1 deck and everything. And I was like, I don't know, man. I kind of feel like Arceus is better. And yeah, I was wrong. I was wrong about that. Lugia's ability to bring any 2 cards from your discard back into play. You would use Archeops, of course, who would let you ramp special energy to anywhere. It was actually a really similar deck to Arceus. And again, it was not really my aggro playstyle, but it was really good, which is why we're going to give him clocked in tier. Next on the list is Chien-Pao EX, which is actually the deck that I still play to this day. I've played it for like over a year now. It's an aggro style deck that I like Blacephalon. It has actually a really similar attack to Blacephalon. And since the death of Blacephalon, since he rotated, this is the closest I've been to replicating that deck, which is probably why I like it so much. But unlike Blacephalon, you have a bunch of different attackers that make the deck more diverse. So if you go up against like a big like 2 or 3 prize deck, you roll up with Chien-Pao and you just one-shot everything, sure. But then if you go against like a little guy deck, like a 1 prize deck, you have Radiant Greninja to snipe bench damage, and in the newer variations, you even have Iron Hands to just like take 2 prizes on the little guys. So this deck is more diverse than Blacephalon. I don't like it as much, I think, just because it doesn't click with me the same way that Blacephalon did, but it's really good, it's really fun, it's my playstyle, and it is an S tier for me. The next game I'm going to be covering is Yu-Gi-Oh! I've played Yu-Gi-Oh! Since I was a little kid. This is kind of the game that like brought me into nerd culture, but I started playing competitively when I was a teenager. Maybe it was like 2012 or 2013, something like that, and the first deck that I played was called Bubble Beat. It's based around elemental hero Bubble Man. I'll never forget when I showed my friend who was playing competitively my hero deck, which was just like 50 random one-ofs of heroes that could make cool fusions and a bunch of like bad trap cards. And he said, all right, so here's what you want to do. You want to take out every hero except for Stratos, Neos Alias, and Bubble Man. And I was so confused. I'm like, bro, how am I going to make any of my cool fusions? But this deck didn't really make fusions except for off of Miracle Fusion. Ideally, you wanted to open a hand of like 4 trap cards and Stratos. You summon Stratos, search Bubble Man, set your 4 trap cards, and then because you have no cards in your hand, you could summon Bubble Man. Going first, you would make a defensive Xyz like Maestroke, and then going second, you would make one that attacks a lot like Blade Armor or Excalibur. And yeah, it was a rank 4 deck based around heroes. You didn't get to use your fusions very much, but you could sometimes, and I had fun with it. I was happy to play my heroes competitively. We're gonna put it in I'm having fun, because I wasn't winning a lot with it, that's for sure, but it was fun to play them. But then I made a more competitive deck next called Evil Swarm. Basically, you played this like big dragon guy who says your opponent can't play level 5 or higher monsters. So if you played against a deck that revolved around level 5 or higher monsters, you just kind of won, which was funny. Yeah, it was my first competitive deck. I wasn't very good at the time, so I wasn't winning a lot, and it wasn't my playstyle, so I wasn't having a ton of fun. But I mean, I was having fun playing a good deck. But yeah, I'm gonna put it in haha lol, because it was funny to just like wall your opponents out of the game. And my next deck was Melodious, which if you play Yu-Gi-Oh! Nowadays, this deck actually got like a new wave of support, which I guess kind of made it meta. I haven't played since it came out, so I can't speak for how good it actually is, but yeah, in 2014, it certainly was not the beast that I guess it is today. You would play solo to Special Aria, who said like all your guys can't be destroyed or targeted, and back in 2014, it was a lot harder to get around effects that couldn't be destroyed or targeted. Now there's plenty of answers in almost every deck, but back then, if your deck wasn't specifically built to out cards like this, you probably just lost the second I summoned this card, which was definitely really funny, which is why I'm going to put it in haha lol. I did get my first locals win with this deck, so it was decent on a local level, and it was pretty fun, but it was mostly just funny. The next deck I built was Heroes again. We got the structure deck with Darklaw in it. Darklaw is a boss monster who says if your opponent's deck is built around their graveyard, then they can't play at all, which was definitely funny. It wasn't a super good deck, but you would just like play Darklaw on a bunch of trap cards and protect him. This is another deck that deserves haha lol, just decks that wall out your opponent from playing. The next deck I built after that was Cosmos. This is actually a really weird deck lore-wise because it's based on The Wizard of Oz and also Star Wars. So you have your main girl, Farm Girl, who's like Dorothy fused with Luke Skywalker, I guess. And then you had like Tin Can, which is like R2-D2 and the Tin Man. I think there was a lion guy and a scarecrow guy. I don't really remember. but then you also had like a Sith Lord card and like clone troopers and like big ships. It was a super weird deck lore wise, but it was really good. You had your 2 pilots, Farm Girl and Good Witch, who could sub out into like the big ships, which couldn't be targeted. Like I was saying with Melodious, not being able to be targeted was a lot stronger back then than it is now. And then if they managed to out your big ships, they would float into smaller ships or other pilots. This deck was definitely really good, and I actually got my first ever invite to nationals with this deck, so this deck definitely put in the work. We're gonna put it in Clocked In. After that, I built a deck that we called Pepe. I guess it was just named off of like the meme, but it was called Perform Age. And this deck was straight up ignorant, man. In my recollection, this is when Yu-Gi-Oh first started to get like insane. This deck would play your entire deck on the first turn pretty easily. You had like Draco Slayer who would pop Plush Fire to search another one, and then you would do that 3 times, and then like search Monkey Board, which would search another one. You had like Giturtle, whatever it was called, to like draw another card on top. Then you could Pendulum Summon all 5 of them back. If you haven't played Yu-Gi-Oh, I'm not even gonna start to try and explain the way that like pendulums work, but it's insane. Because of how good it was compared to everything else, I almost feel like it should be here, but this was a Clocked In deck. Yeah, I didn't love it, but it definitely won some games. Unfortunately, this deck got stolen from me, and I was like 16 then, so I didn't really have the funds to make another deck, so I kind of just had to quit the game, honestly, for a while. Man, if you're a guy who steals things from other people, I hate you! Don't steal from kids. Like, you kind of killed my flair for this game for a long time, and like from card games in general. And you know what, just for that, actually, Pepe gets a D tier. I hate it here. Yeah, I'm pretty biased with that one, but just for that, Pepe gets the D tier. So yeah, I didn't play this game for years. I came back in like 2019 because I heard that my beloved heroes had gotten some support cards. They were really expensive. Like a Dusted Gold, I think, was like $200, and then you had Malicious Bane that was like $200, and then Liquid Soldier, which was like $70, and you needed 2 of them. And yeah, I probably wouldn't have gotten back into the game if it wasn't for the fact that I went to Walmart and I bought 6 packs, and I pulled a Dusted and Bane, and I used up all of my pack luck for the rest of my life. Because I certainly haven't done anything like that since then. But yeah, this deck was super expensive. It was not that good. It wasn't tier 1, I think. It was playable. It was fun to be able to play heroes again. So I think I'll give it I'm having fun just because of that. And then the Dark Ages hit, COVID, you know, I didn't play for like 2 years. Yu-Gi-Oh! Locals started up again before Pokemon did, because it was more adults playing, that like we were old enough to make our own decisions if we wanted to leave the house and stuff. So yeah, the first deck I built after COVID was, you guessed it, heroes again. But we got this new card that we called DPE, which was definitely the most insane card heroes I've ever gotten. It was actually so good that not just heroes were playing it, this card was basically played in every single deck in the game. Once per turn, on you and your opponent's turn, you could pop itself and another card, and then after it's destroyed, it comes back the next turn. So it gives you a pop every turn while like being impossible to remove. And oh yeah, and there was this like Link 2 generic monster that could turn any 2 monsters into a fusion spell from deck, and one of the fusion materials you sent for it let you draw 2 cards. Anyway, this card was broken. The combo was like really repetitive and not that fun to do, and you played a bunch of bricks, and yeah, I didn't like this deck that much, honestly. I didn't play it for very long. So honestly, yeah, this was kind of like a D tier deck just because of how repetitive it was, and I knew it was time for me to move on from my beloved heroes, and I did. We're talking post-COVID now, like I'm an adult, I got money, I can build some real decks. It was finally time to move on from heroes, and the first like real competitive deck I built was Prank Kids. This was like a 1-card starter deck. You just normal summon 1 Prank Kid, link it away to play another one from deck, and then you can make the Link 2, which like searches a card. Basically, you could turn 1 Prank Kid into like 5 and make a giant boss monster. Oh, his name was Battle Butler, and he let you like nuke your entire opponent's board on their turn twice. And then you could also play the Destiny hero, Destroyer, Phoenix, Enforcer, the one that I was talking about in my last hero deck. Basically every deck played that card. Yeah, anyway, Prank Kids was the first deck that I played to real success in this game. I got my first top 8 at regionals with this deck. I had a lot of fun with it, so this is definitely an S tier Yu-Gi-Oh deck for me, and probably my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh deck of all time. I mean, other than Heroes, just based on nostalgia, but like, and then eventually Prank Kids Link 1 Meow Moo got banned, and I had to move on to something else. I was kind of lost. I didn't know what to play, so I picked this like older classic deck, Sky Striker. I definitely didn't play Sky Striker when it was really good, like when it first came out in 2017 and it was the best deck. Now I played it years later when it was like the 5th best deck or something, but we did have Mystic Mine, which is this ignorant field spell that just kind of says your opponent can't play the game as long as you control less monsters than them, and Sky Striker was a deck based around only controlling one monster, so it was perfect for this deck. Yeah, it was kind of like a control deck. You summon one monster that lets you plus a lot, and you set a bunch of spells that kind of work like traps, and yeah. This deck was really fun for me, but definitely not S tier. I'm going to put it in I'm having fun. I was having fun when I played Sky Striker, but my opponents weren't. Not if the deck was working. They definitely weren't having any fun. After that, I made another like new real competitive deck called Sprite. It was like a level 2 combo. Basically, when you think of a good Yu-Gi-Oh card, that's what these cards did. They special summon themselves and they search another one, and then they special that and they search another one, and then the ones you play negate your opponent's effects. So just the definition of a good generic Yu-Gi-Oh deck. This is more of a clocked in deck for me though. It was good and I won, but yeah, that's a 9 to 5 deck right there. Elf got banned and I just needed a change, so I ended up playing Floanderies. And if you've played Yu-Gi-Oh, you have either played Floanderies or you hate it, because this is the definition of a 9 to 5 deck. I mean, you're not playing this deck to have fun, you're playing to win. I almost feel like this deck should have its own category. You know what? I'm going to make its own category for this. I want to win without playing the game. Yeah, that's where Floanderies belongs. It was basically a strategy based on playing a bunch of floodgates that say your opponent can't win the game while you plus a bunch of resources for free, and yeah, everyone hates this deck. And then the final deck in the Yu-Gi-Oh category is Pirelli, the Eevee deck. You play a little cat that can level up into a bunch of bigger cats. You had one that was a negate, one that attacked a bunch and searched, and then you had like this Towers one that was unaffected by card effects, and he had a bunch of interactions on your opponent's turn. This deck was cool, but I like one card starter like aggro or control decks, and this is not that. This is kind of like a combo based deck, but it was good, so I'm gonna put it in the 9 to 5 clocked in. And that is it for Yu-Gi-Oh. So now we're moving on to the Bandai games. The first game on this list is going to be Dragon Ball Super. Odds are you haven't played this game because it was pretty niche at the time, but basically, so you can understand what I'm talking about, just think of this game as like a Magic clone. We had a good niche community and regionals with like 300 to 500 players, so I had a lot of fun with this game, but it was definitely degenerate as all hell. The first deck I'm going to cover is Mecha Frieza. It came out during set 3, and it had an ability that let you take life to play cards instead of paying their mana cost. At that point in time, we didn't really have any way to cheat characters out, so yeah, this was by far the best deck in the game. It wasn't exactly my playstyle. I'm going to give it a 9 to 5. The next deck on the list is Hirudegarn Storm, which revolved around a 1-drop called Bardock the Progenitor, who let you take a life and attack. Oh yeah, every card in this game had haste, by the way, which is probably why it was so degenerate. But yeah, Bardock would attack, he would switch into a 2-drop that let you draw a card and attack, and then you had 2 different blue cards that would let you untap a mana, so you could do the 1 into 2-drop thing again. It was a turn 2 kill deck. In set 4, we got our first turn 2 kill deck. So that's this game. I'm going to make a new category for this one called I'm Having Fun, but my opponent isn't. And that's where Hirudegarn will go. Next on the list, we have Super Shenron. This deck also revolves around the 1 and 2 yellow drops that I was talking about. But this time, your leader has an ability that says once you have 20 cards in your discard, which this deck could consistently do in 1 to 2 turns, by the way, you could banish those 20 cards and you could take another turn. So in case this game wasn't degenerate enough, we now have a turn skip. I'm having fun, but my opponent isn't. The next deck on this list is Broly the Awakened Threat. This deck also revolved around the 1 and 2 yellow drops that I keep talking about. If you haven't noticed this by now, Bardock the Progenitor was definitely my favorite card in this game. At this point in time, we had more defensive capabilities in this game that could combat this aggressive strategy. So this deck had a second gear in which you could shift to, where you played this card called Goku the Awakened Power. He had a keyword called Victory Strike. What Victory Strike does is, if this card lands a damage, you win the game. It doesn't matter how much health your opponent has. If it lands a damage, you win the game. So I hope you have a negate to negate his attack. But this deck also had a card called Bad Ring Laser, which would negate a negate. So you could summon Victory Strike, attack, they have a counter for it, you have a counter for their counter, and you win the game. The versatility of having an aggro strategy and also like a mid-range boss monster was super fun, and this is my favorite deck in Dragon Ball by far, so it is going to get an I love this game. At this point in time, Bardock got banned. My beloved 1-drop was gone, so I found a deck that was still built around Victory Strike, being Chilai and Limo. This was not my playstyle because I didn't have an aggro strategy anymore, so this is going to go in clocked in 9 to 5. We were hit with the dark ages of COVID. Unlike Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, which had 20 years of fans backing it, were able to make it through COVID and come out on the other side. This game didn't really. Yeah, COVID killed off my local scene along with most people's local scene and kind of just killed the game in general. So the game was pretty dead at the point when I played this deck. Because of the game dying, I'm just going to put this in I hate it here. No hate to the deck, but I was sad that my favorite game had died. Last but not least, we have the One Piece card game. This game is relatively new. It's about a year old at this point in time, and it's super fun. I mean, for the last year, this has pretty much been my main card game. I'm playing it more than Yu-Gi-Oh!, more than Pokemon. I love this game. And the first deck that I'm covering is Rush Zoro. Set 1 was when this deck came out, and this and Green Kid were pretty much the only decks that you could play because Zoro's aggro strategy was very punishing to any fun deck. He has an effect that says every card on your field gains 1000 power, so you would play these little like weenie searcher cards that would replace themselves on summon, and because of the power buff, they were valid attackers in this deck, so it's just like an aggro weenie rush strategy. This definitely clicked with my playstyle, and it was really good. So that is all the criteria for an S tier deck. I love Rush Zoro and I miss it. I wish it was still good to this day, but there's just too much that counters it. The second deck I played in this game is Mill Nami. Her strategy is to mill yourself out, and as soon as your deck hits 0 and you would normally deck out, instead of losing the game, you win the game. That's her printed effect on the leader, and that's the only thing it does. This deck is definitely funny. It should probably be in Haha Law. It also, I think, could fit into I'm having fun, but my opponent's not, because the idea is to just stop everything that they do the whole time while milling cards. It's kind of a control deck, but I'm going to put it in Haha Law because it is very funny to mill yourself out and win the game. The next deck is Katakuri. If you play this game, this is similar to Floanderies, where you have either played this deck or you hate this deck. This deck is straight up ignorant. It has a 10-drop that says you win the game. Not actually, but it gives you a massive advantage. And if you play 2 or 3 back-to-back, you definitely are just going to win the game. This deck is not my playstyle at all, and I think it belongs in 9 to 5. It also could go. No, you know what? Just out of hate to this deck, it's going with Floanderies. I want to win without playing the game. That's Katakuri. And the last deck on this list is Anel. He is another yellow leader like Katakuri, but unlike Katakuri, this deck requires a little bit of skill to win with. Sorry, Katakuri players. I know it's not an aggro strategy like all of the decks in S tier are, but this deck really clicks with me. I've been playing it since set 5 when it came out. We're on set 7 now, and this is still my main deck. This is an absolute S tier for me. It's definitely the best control strategy in the game, and it's been really fun. In a game where aggro strategies aren't really good right now, this deck just does it for me. So yep, that's my tier list. These are my favorite decks from each respective game. Subscribe.